This is Mr. DarXnights, and tonight we drive deep into the dark. Some roads are paved with memories, others with blood. Turn the volume low. Close your eyes and let the shadows take the wheel. This story is not just a legend. It's a route you might have already passed. And next time, you might hear it too. They always said Route 17 was cursed. Truckers whispered about it at diners off the exits, usually after midnight when the caffeine ran dry and the air got just heavy enough to talk about things they couldn't quite explain. It was always the same stretch of asphalt, a lonely, cracked piece of highway winding to the forests of West Virginia, surrounded by hills, hollow trees, and fog that lingered too long. Locals didn't talk much, but truckers, they knew. They heard the voice. It was never a scream. That's what made it worse. It was calm, fragile, a woman, soft-spoken, barely whispering over the CB radio. "Help me. Please, it's dark. I'm cold. I crashed. I think my leg's broken." Then silence. No reply, no coordinates. Just static. Sometimes she'd say a name, Jack, or "Can anybody hear me?" Then it would vanish. But when someone tried to find her, checked the side of the road, pulled over to search, there was never any accident, not even tire tracks. Some said it was just some CB prankster. Others swore it was real. A ghost, maybe, or a trap. New drivers usually laughed it off until they heard her themselves. That's what happened to Cole Matthews. He was 28, just a year into long-haul driving. He took pride in staying rational, hadn't believed in ghosts since he was 12. But Cole had his own reasons for taking night runs. He liked the solitude, preferred shadows over sunshine, no small talk, no questions. That night, he was hauling steel from Pittsburgh to Asheville, and Route 17 was the shortest way down. He hadn't thought twice when dispatch routed him through it. But at the truck stop off exit 94, he heard a group of older truckers talking low over cold eggs and bitter coffee. "She's still talking," one of them said. "Heard her last week. Just past the old mile marker 239. Same voice, same story. Damn thing chills your bones." Cole had scoffed. Ghost stories. CB interference. Maybe some lunatic with a looped recording. Nothing to worry about. Still, when he walked out to his rig and flipped the CB on, he paused. The channel buzzed with the usual chatter. Weather warnings, roadkill reports, bored drivers joking to pass the time. He drove on. The night was uneventful at first. Boring even. Miles of trees. No streetlights. Just his own headlights pushing back the dark. He passed the old mile markers, green signs smeared with grime and rust. 230, 231, 232. By 2:43 a.m., the road had gone completely quiet. No cars ahead. Nothing behind. The CB had gone silent, too. And then, clear as day, a voice slipped through static. "Help me?" Cole jerked upright in his seat. "Please? I crashed. It's dark. I'm alone. Can anybody hear me?" Her voice was young. Early 20s, maybe. No emotion, like she'd already cried herself dry. No panic, just hopelessness. He reached for the mic. "This is eastbound on 17. Come again, ma'am? Where exactly are you?" Nothing. Just static. Then softly, "Jack, please." "It's me." His hands tightened on the wheel. "You're not Jack," he muttered. He scanned the roadside. Trees leaned in like they were listening. Fog crawled low across the pavement, wrapping around his front tires. He passed a curve. Then another. The voice didn't come back. Cole switched channels, but everything was dead. The further he drove, the worse the air felt. Thicker, colder, like something ancient was watching. At mile marker 239, he slowed. That's where the truckers said they heard her most. And that's when his headlights hit something. A figure, standing just off the shoulder. Cole slammed the brakes. The semi screeched and hissed, coming to a lurching halt. The figure was gone. He stared through the windshield. Nothing but trees now. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe his eyes were playing tricks. But he knew what he'd seen. A woman. long black hair, barefoot, standing still like she was waiting for him. He opened the cab door and stepped down. Cold, far too cold for May. His boots crunched on gravel. He walked to the edge of the road, shining a flashlight into the woods. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone there?" No answer, but the woods made a sound. A strange rustling, not like leaves or wind, like fabric, like someone shifting. Then a whisper, not through the CB. Right there, just off the trees. "Help me?" He froze. The voice had no direction. It was like it came from all around him, not in front or behind. He took one step back, and the flashlight flickered. His truck's engine sputtered. And then it died. He rushed back into the cab, heart pounding. The lights dimmed. The radio went dead. Everything electronic just stopped. Cole swore and turned the key. Nothing. Just silence and the creeping sense that someone was watching. His breath fogged inside of the cab. He looked in the side mirror. That's when he saw her again, standing directly behind the trailer, not moving, staring straight at him. He jumped out of the cab again, shouting now, "Hey, are you hurt? What's your name?" But when he rounded the trailer, she was gone. Only wet footprints remained, bare, human, and leading into the woods. That's when he saw it. A metal sign buried behind the overgrown brush. Rusted, faded, site of fatal accident, March 1986. In memory of Allison V. Harper, there were flowers. Rotten now, crushed by time. Cole didn't know why, but he started taking pictures of the sign, the area, the woods. Then he climbed back into the cab and for no clear reason turned the key again. The truck started. The lights came back. The CB crackled. But this time, the voice wasn't hers. It was a man's. Deep, gravelly. Turn around. Now. Then the channel went dead again. Cole didn't wait. He floored the gas, speeding down Route 17 like the devil was chasing him. He didn't stop until he reached a gas station nearly 30 miles away, lit by bright sodium lights that made the night seem normal again. He sat in the cab, shaking. For the first time in years, Cole felt truly afraid. Not of ghosts, not of voices, but how real it all had been. How cold the air got. How detailed the sign was. How the footprints weren't his. And why the CB voice had told him to leave. He went online that morning, digging through newspaper archives. Most didn't go back far enough. But on Conspiracy Forum, buried under CB Ghost Frequencies, he found it. A clipping, March 1986. A woman named Allison Harper had gone missing on Route 17 after calling for help over her car radio. No wreck was ever found. No body. Just a voicemail to her fiancé. "I think I broke my leg. I'm by a sign. I can't see anything." She was never heard from again. Until now. Cole saved the screenshots. He wanted to go back. Not out of bravery, but because he couldn't sleep anymore. Every time he shut his eyes, he heard her whisper, "Jack, help me." But the worst came 3 nights later. When he checked his phone, the photo he'd taken of the roadside sign had changed. The flowers were fresh. And in the bottom corner, barely visible in the brush, was a face. Not hers. A man's. Staring at him. Smiling. He leaned closer to the radio, his eyes glued to the fog ahead. "Ma'am, repeat. What's your emergency?" There was a pause, then a soft gasp, like someone realizing they weren't alone. "He's coming back," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't let him find me again." Cole's stomach sank. The hairs on his arms rose. He glanced at the CB unit, like it might explain what the hell he was hearing. The voice cut through again, louder now, panic setting in. "Help me. I'm by the curve. There's blood. I think my leg is broken, please." He grabbed the mic. "I'm close. I'm going to find you. Just hold on." The fog got thicker. Trees bent overhead like dark arms. The road narrowed, and the headlights caught signs rusted beyond recognition. He slowed down, scanned every ditch, every culvert, until something on the right caught his eye, a crumpled road barrier, half buried in moss. A cross stuck out just behind it, weathered wood, faded plastic flowers. He pulled over and cut the engine. Silence swallowed everything, except for her. "I hear you," she whispered through the CB. "You're close." Cole opened the door and stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath his boots. The air felt heavier than it should have. Wet, cold, like it didn't belong in May. He walked toward the barrier. There was no wreck, no fresh skid marks, no sign of an accident, just that cross. He knelt down to brush away the moss from its base. A name etched in worn lettering, Allison V. Harper, 1992. Then came the static again, but not from the CB this time. From somewhere behind him. He turned, and the headlights flickered. A shadow crossed the beams, slowly, deliberately. Cole's breath caught. It looked like a man, tall, shoulders hunched, arms longer than normal. Its head was cocked at an odd angle, like it was listening to something only it could hear. Then it was gone. He stood frozen for what felt like minutes. Then the CB crackled again, louder than before. Her voice, screaming now, "He's here!" Something slammed into the side of the truck. Hard. Cole ran back, climbed into the cab, and locked the door. The CB whined with static, so sharp it sounded like it was tearing itself apart. He reached to shut off, and stopped. In the mirror, right behind the truck, stood that figure. Its eyes gleamed white in the fog, and it was smiling, not like a person smiles, more like a puppet that learned how. Cole peeled out, tires skidding on gravel, nearly sliding into the ditch as he tore down the road. No more CB transmissions, just the sound of his own breath, heavy and uneven. He didn't stop until the sun started to rise, when the fog burned off and the world felt real again. He didn't sleep that day, just sat in his cab, staring at the highway from a truck stop lot, wondering if he imagined the whole thing. Then he checked the CB logs on his dash unit. Something strange. The call wasn't recorded, but there was a time-stamped signal, a transmission log at 3:14 a.m. from a channel that was no longer functional. Dead frequency. He looked up Allison V. Harper on his phone. One article. Local girl, 23. Found dead on Route 17 in 1992 after a reported crash. But the twist? There had been no crash. Her body had been dumped. The car set up to look like an accident. But the autopsy showed signs of assault and blunt force trauma inconsistent with any wreck. The case had gone cold. And the man she was last seen with? Never identified. The article ended with a line that chilled him more than the voice had. She was reportedly last heard calling for help on a nearby trucker CB radio, but no driver came forward. Cole didn't know what to believe. But that night, he went back to the cross. He waited there, engine running. Nothing happened for hours. Then, 3:12 a.m., the fog returned. The CB light blinked red, despite being off. Then the radio came to life. "I remember you." Cole grabbed the mic. "Allison?" Silence. Then a man's voice. "Wrong. Too smooth. Too calm. She remembers you too. You shouldn't have come back." The headlights died. The engine followed. And then the screaming started, not from the radio. From behind the truck. High-pitched. Animalistic. Metal twisted. Glass cracked. Then the mic in his hand got hot. Burning hot. He dropped it, skin blistering as it hit the floor. A knock, right beside his ear. He turned. The window was fog from the inside, and in it, written in letters traced by a single finger, "Help, M." The last thing Cole remembered was a glass shattering in that smile, too wide, stretching where no face should stretch. When they found his truck the next day, it was idling with the door wide open. No sign of him. Only his phone on the driver's seat. And one new picture in the camera roll. The cross. And behind it, barely visible in the fog, a hand, pale, reaching, as if waving, or warning. The official report listed Cole Danner as a missing person, one of dozens. Route 17 had a reputation, unspoken but deeply felt. Truckers who drove it regularly shared whispers at rest stops. Strange fog, CB chatter that didn't match known call signs. And that curve near mile marker 231, where the woods pressed too close and time felt slower. They said it stole time. And sometimes, people, Cole's rig was towed to the impound lot in Colebridge. No signs of a struggle. No blood. Just the heat-blistered CB mic and that phone. Authorities combed the woods around the cross. Nothing. No footprints. No drag marks. Not even animal activity. As if the place itself had been frozen in a vacuum. But that night, it started again. Trucker forums lit up with chatter. Anyone else hear the girl crying over Channel 3? Thought it was some sick prank. She said her name was Allie. Kinda messed up. Sounded real. I was just outside Colebridge. I swear to God, I saw someone walking barefoot on the center line. Then someone shared Cole's photo, the last one on his phone. It spread fast. Reddit, Discord, even mainstream news gave a mention. Ghost transmission sparks interest in Cole case. Most called it a hoax. But the ones who drove Route 17 at night, they knew better. One of them was Ray Delton. Old school, 40 years on the road. Didn't believe in ghosts or demons, but he did believe in patterns. And Route 17 had a pattern. A sound that didn't belong. A fog that wasn't natural. He'd driven through all 50 states. Never heard silence like the one on that road. Dead silence. Like the trees were holding their breath. Ray printed out Allison Harper's obituary and clipped it to his visor. He wanted answers. So one night, he parked a mile from the cross, turned off his lights, killed the engine, and waited. 1:34 a.m., a whisper on the CB. Faint, a woman sob. He clicked to Channel 3. Static, 1:51 a.m., a faint voice, almost like a recording. It hurts. Why won't anyone help me? Ray didn't speak. Just listened. Then 2:09 a.m. The voice changed. A man now. Calm. Cold. You're not supposed to be here, Ray. Ray blinked. The voice had said his name. The mic was off. Power disconnected. Yet the voice was clear as day. You can't help her. She's mine now. Ray reached for the ignition. The truck wouldn't start. Fog rolled in thick and fast, blanketing the windows. His breath frosted instantly. Then came the knock. Not at the door. Under the truck. Metal groaned. Chain scraped. And then he saw them, bare feet, white and wet, walking slowly around the cab. He ducked, heart racing, trying to glimpse the figure through the mirror. Nothing. Then a crash. The passenger side window exploded inward. Ray covered his face, bleeding from a cheek. He looked up. She was inside. A woman, mud-streaked face, torn dress, hair plastered to her skull. Allie, he whispered, before he even realized it. Her lips didn't move, but he heard her. He's using me. He needs drivers to find him again. He feeds on a road. Ray shook his head. What are you talking about? It was never just one crash. He's been here longer than you've been alive. And every time someone listens, he grows stronger. Behind her, the cab stretched into darkness that shouldn't have been there. A hallway, lined with CB radios and photographs nailed to wood. He saw Cole's face among them. Pale, open-eyed, mouth still shaped in a scream. Allie, Ray begged. What do I do? She looked up, tears sliding down her cracked skin. Don't listen. Don't ever answer. That's how he gets in. Then the hallway slammed shut, like the air collapsed on itself, and the woman vanished. The truck started on its own, lights flickering. Ray threw into gear and peeled out, leaving rubber and blood behind. When he reached the highway, the fog disappeared instantly, like someone had turned off a machine. He didn't stop until he reached a truck stop in Tennessee. He called in sick for the first time in 15 years. Parked his rig, got a motel room, drank until he passed out. When he woke up, there was a note slipped under his door. Plain, white paper, handwritten. We warned you. Don't ever return. Or next time the road takes you. Ray left trucking the next week. Sold the rig. Burned the CB unit. But even in his apartment, miles from Route 17, the radio in his kitchen flickered on. Static. Then her voice, soft, sad. He's not done with you yet. Story 2. Officer Markhill had seen his share of strange walk-ins at the Huxley County Sheriff's Department. Drunks. Paranoids. A guy once wandering claiming he was Elvis's twin. But nothing prepared him for the boy. It was a Tuesday night in October. Quiet shift. Rain tapping like fingers on the windows. Mark was finishing up a report when the front door creaked open. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. Soaking wet. Thin. Shivering in a striped shirt and canvas sneakers that looked 20 years out of date. He didn't say anything at first. Just walked in like he belonged there, eyes blank. Mark stood slowly, unease crawling up his spine. You all right, kid? You lost. The boy looked up. Pale skin. Dark circles under glassy blue eyes. Then he spoke. My name is Joshua Blake. I need to call my mom. Mark froze. The name rang a bell. Too loud to ignore. He pulled up the department database and typed quickly. The photo blinked onto the screen. Joshua Blake, age 10. Missing since July 5th, 1998. Same striped shirt. Same face. Same everything. Impossible. The kid was identical to the photo, down to the faint scar under his chin from falling off a swing. Mark's hand trembled as he picked up the phone. Chief, you need to get down here. Now. Within 20 minutes, the station buzzed with silent disbelief. Chief Darnell, Forensics Officer Klein, and 2 FBI liaisons stood behind the glass, watching Joshua sit calmly at the interrogation table, sipping hot cocoa. He answered every question like he'd just left school yesterday. What was the name of his dog? Max. What grade was he in? 4th. Who was the president? Bill Clinton. When asked about where he had been, he paused. I was in the woods, he said softly. What woods? Asked Klein. Joshua blinked. The ones with no sky. Just black trees and whispering people. Klein frowned. Do you mean like a basement? Underground. Joshua shook his head. No, it was like a place between things. Like a hallway that forgot where it was going. The adults exchanged uneasy glances. Klein leaned forward. Do you remember when it was? Joshua looked confused. It was last week. My mom told me not to go too far on my bike, but I wanted to see the creek. Klein whispered to Darnell. He has no idea he's been gone 25 years. Tests were ordered. Blood work. Dental. Prints. All matched. 100%. This wasn't a hoax. It was him, and that's when it started to unravel. Joshua was placed under protective custody with CPS, while arrangements were made to contact his mother, now living 2 states away. She was remarried, never had more children, and when they told her they had found her son, she fainted. The reunion was planned carefully. Cameras, psychologists, trauma counselors. She stepped into the room and collapsed again, because the boy she hugged was exactly as she remembered him, like time had paused and spat him back out. He clung to her like nothing had changed. For 3 days, things seemed normal. Then came the dreams. Joshua woke up screaming one night, eyes rolled back, fingers clawing the walls. He's in the hallway, he sobbed. He's coming again. I wasn't supposed to leave. His foster guardian, an older nurse named Cynthia, recorded it. Joshua didn't recognize himself in the video the next morning. Didn't remember the dream, but the hallway talk continued. He doesn't have a face, Joshua told Cynthia during a walk. He's just shadows. But he wears shoes that go click, click, click on the floor like coins. Cynthia called a caseworker. The caseworker called Darnell. Something wasn't right. 2 days later, the boy vanished again. Vanished from a locked room. No broken windows. No disturbed locks. No forced entry. Gone. Just like 1998. Cameras showed static from 2:04 a.m. to 2:09 a.m. When footage returned, the bed was empty, the covers still warm. A search ensued. Nationwide alert. Amber notices. News coverage. And that's when another call came in. We have a kid who just walked into our station in Knoxville, Tennessee. Claims to be Tyler Griggs. Missing since 2003. Looks exactly the same. FBI agents cross-referenced cases. Patterns began to emerge. Children who disappeared between 1995 and 2005, all aged between 9 and 11, all from small towns or rural areas, all vanished without a trace. And in the past year, had reappeared. Same age, same clothes, same injuries from before. Zero memory of time past. And then each one vanished again within days. Without warning, without trace. Gone, as if snatched back by whatever had let them go. The media didn't get wind of it. The FBI kept it tightly sealed. But the agents on the inside started talking. Because each child mentioned the hallway with no end. And someone walking it. Someone called the man with the black shoes. A name that didn't appear in any of their past statements during their original disappearances. But all of them mentioned it upon returning. One agent, Russell Byers, took it personally. His niece had gone missing in 1999. Never found. No suspects. He reviewed the interviews obsessively. The kids all use the same phrases. Sky made of velvet. Doors with no knobs. Click, click, click. He started sleeping in his office, mapping timelines and locations. He noticed something no one else did. Each child had been taken on the same day of the week, Wednesday, and returned exactly 9,125 days later. Not approximate, exact. It was a cycle, a pattern, something systematic. He found old reports, even as far back as the 1930s. Stories of children found in strange places, unchanged, confused, and speaking of long black hallways and clocks that ticked backward. He wrote it all down in a binder, but before he could present it to the task force, he vanished. Last seen leaving the field office at 9:17 p.m. His car was found still idling in the parking lot, driver's side door wide open, shoes placed neatly by the bumper. That same night, a young girl named Melanie Jaspers, missing since 2001, walked into a gas station outside Seattle, asking for help, wearing the same jacket she'd worn the day she vanished. Her eyes were empty, and on her left palm, scratched in with what looked like a nail, was one word: run. Melanie Jaspers sat on the examination table under cold fluorescent lights, silent as her fingers traced a word etched into her palm. Run. The doctor had asked her a dozen questions, none of which she answered. Instead, she just kept glancing at the mirror in the observation room. Except it wasn't a two-way mirror, just a normal one. And yet, she whispered to it, they're watching. They always are. But not through the glass. Through the space behind it. Detective Leah Monroe leaned forward from her seat outside the exam room. Space behind it? She muttered to the agent beside her. Agent Corey Vance nodded. Every one of them says things like that. Hallways behind doors. Time that folds. Rooms that vanish. You really believe these kids are, what, pulled into another dimension? Vance tapped the folder open. Inside were photos of 6 children. All of them disappeared between 1998 and 2005. All of them reappeared recently, unchanged. Joshua Blake, Tyler Griggs, Melanie Jaspers, and 3 others, all now vanished again. It's not belief, Vance said quietly. It's observation. We watched Joshua sleep under 24-hour surveillance. No doors opened. No people entered. And still, he was gone. It's like something took him between seconds. Leah shivered. What about the word on her hand? She didn't write it. That's the thing. The skin under the nail bed shows zero ink or blood, like it was burned in or pressed. But the skin is healed, like it's been there for years. Leah glanced back at the mirror. Can I talk to her? She won't answer unless you ask the right thing, which is, ask her if she walked the hallway. Leah entered slowly. The girl didn't flinch. She was 11 when she vanished. Still 11. Even her shoes had sand from the playground where she was last seen. Leah sat. Melanie, can I ask you something? No answer. Did you walk the hallway? Melanie's eyes snapped to hers. Everything in her expression drained. Her bottom lip trembled. You're not supposed to say that, she whispered. He hears it when you do. Leah leaned forward. Who hears it? Melanie's eyes slowly shifted to the mirror. Her breath fogged the room, even though the thermostat read 72 degrees. She whispered, the man with the black shoes. That night, Melanie vanished. They'd put her in a locked hospital room, monitored by 2 guards and 3 cameras. The feed glitched from 3:01 a.m. to 3:04 a.m. When it returned, the bed was empty. But this time, there was something else. The mirror in her room had cracked top to bottom, from the center outward, like something had pushed through the glass. No signs of break-in. No sound. No motion triggers. Just static and then nothing. 2 days later, the department received a letter, mailed from a post office that had been closed since 1989, typed on a typewriter. No fingerprints. No stamp. Inside were 7 photos, black and white, each of a different hallway, long, endless, twisting, some concrete, others wooden, and one made entirely of what looked like skin. At the bottom of the envelope was a note. They belonged to him now. They all walked too far. Leah kept investigating, even as the case was ordered silent. No press, no release. The public never heard a word. She started cross-referencing old folklore, children taken by forest spirits, tales from Appalachia about the endless corridor, a demon named Vade who walked through doorways that didn't belong to any building. Vade was always described the same way, tall, no face, black shoes, click, click, click. She found a story in a 1924 Tennessee paper. A boy named Isaac Renner had vanished for 3 years, returned unchanged, and drew a picture of a long hallway with doors on either side. Every door had a child's face drawn into the wood. His own name was written above one door. 2 weeks later, he vanished again. It kept happening. Every few decades, a child returns, then disappears again. But only recently had the cycle sped up. She called in a dream psychologist, Dr. Rourke, who specialized in recovered memory through hypnotherapy. They had one remaining returned child, Nathan Reese, 10 years old, had been back for 6 days. Quiet, claimed to remember nothing beyond a strange park where time stood still. Rourke put Nathan under hypnosis. The boy's heart rate doubled within 30 seconds. His breath hitched. Tears leaked from closed eyes. And then he spoke. Door. 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 Rourke asked, "What's behind the door, Nathan?" Nathan's voice dropped into a tone not his own. He walks. He always walks. One step or secret. The lights flickered. Every monitor in the hospital room reset, and Nathan flatlined for 13 seconds. Then he gasped, came back, and screamed a name no one recognized. Solomon. Leah reviewed the footage. Again and again. In frame 2485, just before Nathan flatlined, something passed behind the hospital curtain. A shadow, a figure, tall, featureless, black shoes. Leah froze the frame, enhanced it, a blur but unmistakable shape, and below the curtain line, shoes, polished, old-fashioned, black leather with 2 silver buckles. Click, click, click. She traced the name Solomon to a ghost story published in 1973. A boy who vanished on his 10th birthday. A boy who returned years later, walked into a church and said, "I've seen the library of lost paths. I watched the man with the shoes walk forever. I followed him once. That's why I can't stay. He died that night, struck by lightning. There was no storm. But what chilled Leah most was a photograph of that boy. He looked just like Joshua Blake. Same face, same hair, identical scar on the chin. Different name, different decade. Same boy. She dug deeper. Found another case from 1954. Again, same face, different name. In every generation, someone returned. Not aged, not changed. They were resets. Like something was using the same child, recycling them over and over. And they were always followed by the sound of footsteps. Always. Then came the voicemail. Leah found it on her office phone. Timestamp 3:03 a.m. A boy's voice. Whispering. They're behind the wallpaper. Don't sleep near mirrors. Don't say his name 3 times. Don't walk when the hallway bends. It bends because he's awake. Click. That was it. No number. No trace. Leah started sleeping in her office. Paranoid. Watching corners. Until one night, she heard it too. Click, click, click. Down the hallway. She got up, pistol in hand. But the hallway outside her office was dark. Too dark. Every light dead. Emergency generators offline. She stepped out, heart racing. The floor was cold. The air, thick, like walking through syrup. Then she saw it. At the far end of the hallway, just at the edge of shadow, stood a tall shape. Still, waiting. No face, but shoes. Black, shining. Click, click, click. She blinked. It was gone. Lights returned. And in her office, where her files had been, only one remained. A single photo. Joshua Blake, staring directly into the camera, with something behind him, just out of focus. A blur of darkness. And just beneath the photo, scribbled in childlike handwriting, "You're next." Leah didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hallway again. That same stretch of unnatural blackness. Endless, pulseless, silent, except for that echo, click, 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 growing louder with each breath. And then she'd wake, drenched in sweat, hands trembling. But the worst part wasn't the dreams. It was the fact that her office mirror cracked exactly down the center on the 4th night. No one had touched it. No vibration. No heat. Just the same fracture Melanie's mirror had shown before she vanished. She kept the pieces in a sealed evidence bag. Each shard shimmered faintly, as though reflecting something that wasn't in the room, or anywhere in this world. Leah finally did what she swore not to. She called the only person who had worked on a case remotely similar, retired Detective Alan Quill, who'd spent 15 years chasing the urban legend known as the Corridor Kid. She found him living off-grid in northern Idaho, where electricity flickered and phones barely worked. His cabin had no mirrors. Every window was covered in black cloth. "You were never supposed to find me," he said the moment he opened the door. She showed him the photo of Joshua, and his lips went pale. How many returned? 7 in the last 2 years. 6 are gone again. Quill's voice was a whisper. And all of them were the same child, weren't they? Leah hesitated. "We think so." "No," he said. "You know so. It's always the same boy. Different names, different clothes. But the eyes, they're never different." Leah pulled out a folder of sketches drawn by Joshua during his brief hospital stay. One was just a black square. Another had a hallway filled with tiny doorways, each labeled with random numbers. But the last one was the one that chilled her. It was a door, closed, with a carved symbol in the center, like a spiral with thorns. Quill stared at it, then vanished into the back room. When he returned, he was holding a box. Inside were dozens of identical drawings, from children who had returned and disappeared again as far back as the 1930s. "Same spiral," Leah whispered. "It's a seal," Quill said. Old, ancient, not human. It's the lock that keeps something inside, or keeps us outside of it. Leah asked a question she hadn't dared. What happens if the door opens? Quill didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, Leah returned home to find her hallway longer. Not slightly, drastically. Where her hallway once had 3 doors, there were now 6. And none of the new ones opened, except the one at the far end. It was slightly ajar. She didn't approach. Instead, she called the precinct and ordered surveillance placed inside her home. She stayed at a motel, but footage from her hallway camera the next morning showed something disturbing. At 3:04 a.m., the hallway light flickered, and a silhouette stepped out of the far door. It was a child, barefoot. Joshua. He stared directly at the camera, eyes dark, and then he said something. No audio, just his lips moving. Leah had a forensic lip reader analyze it. He said 4 words. You left me there. 2 days later, the motel front desk called her in a panic. Her room had been ransacked, everything untouched except the mirror in the bathroom, which was shattered into 27 pieces. 1 shard was missing. In its place was a sticky note. You can't run down a hallway that never ends. She tried contacting the other parents. Most had gone silent, disconnected numbers, disappeared, except for one, Travis Griggs, father of Tyler Griggs, who had returned just a week earlier before vanishing again. Travis answered her call with 1 word. Too late. Then hung up. She traced the call location to an abandoned church near Lake Delphi. She went there. Inside, she found the words "Walk Too Far" scrawled on every wall in chalk, and a single shoe in the center of the altar, a black leather child's shoe. Inside it, another drawing. This one showed a hallway bending like a spiral staircase, but horizontal. Along the walls were dozens of childlike figures. Hanging, still, at the bottom of the drawing, Tyler had written, "He walks in circles, but he never forgets." Leah was done waiting. She set up her bedroom with every possible monitoring tool. 5 cameras, a motion detector, a pressure sensor on the floor. She placed herself in bed at 2:45 a.m., waited. At exactly 3:03 a.m., she heard it. Click, click, click. Not outside, not in the hallway, but beneath her bed. She didn't move. The motion detector blinked red. She lifted the sheet. Nothing, but the hallway on her monitor had changed. The live feed now showed it stretching endlessly, doors blinking in and out of existence. Her hallway was no longer part of this world. She stepped out, cold, silent. The doors were real now, and the one at the far end creaked open. Behind it, darkness. She stepped forward, slowly. Every breath seemed to echo unnaturally. She heard a whisper, "Joshua," then silence. Inside the door, there was no room, just stairs going down, made of stone. At the bottom, a library, but not books, not shelves, just doors, tiny ones, like drawers in a morgue, each with a name etched in the front. She walked past them. Tyler Griggs, Melanie Jaspers, Nathan Reese. She found her own name, etched in deeper. No other markings. She touched the handle. Cold. Suddenly, all the other drawers slammed shut in unison, and footsteps began. Not behind her, not beside her, but everywhere, like they walked around her in circles, like walls were shifting. And then she saw him, Joshua, standing at the end of the room. But now his face was different. Older, blank, aged and young all at once. Behind him, the man, tall, no face, black shoes. Leah couldn't move. She heard her own voice in her head say one thing, "Walk too far." Then, darkness. She awoke in the hospital 3 days later. No memory of how she got there. No sign of injury. The attending nurse said she was found in a park in Delaware, miles away from her home, clutching a drawing in her hands. It was the same spiral door, but now it was open. Inside, something with fingers that were too long. No one believed her story. She was put on leave, ordered into psychiatric evaluation, and then came the last voicemail from her own phone, a recording she never made, a boy's voice. Again, soft, but urgent. You saw behind the door. You can't stay here now. You're part of the hallway. Click. No caller ID. Leah lives in hiding now. Off-grid. No mirrors. No phones. She paints over every door in her house. But some nights, she hears anyway. Click, click, click. And a child's voice just outside her window. Detective Monroe, why didn't you follow me? Then silence. Until tomorrow night. Because the hallway never ends. And the boy always returns. Story 3. The house was supposed to be a fresh start for Brian and Amanda Marks. Moving into the foreclosed property on 12th Avenue in Detroit was supposed to be the solution to their financial troubles. It was cheap, spacious, and offered the promise of a quiet life for their 2 young children. The house had been vacant for years, and while it was far from perfect, cobwebs in corners, old furniture left behind, it was all they could afford. They had no idea what they were about to move into. At first, the creaks of the old house were nothing more than the natural groans of a place long abandoned. The first few nights were quiet, peaceful even. The kids, Olivia and Caleb, quickly adapted to the dusty old rooms. The bedrooms had a strange, musty smell, but with a little air freshener, it was livable. That was until the first night they heard it. It started with a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a low hum, like the faint whirring of an air vent. But that didn't make sense. There were no air ducts. The house had old heaters. No central air. Amanda had checked the vents when they first moved in and found nothing unusual. Still, that sound persisted, a hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor, like something was alive in the walls. It made Brian uneasy, but he dismissed it as nothing more than the house settling. By the 4th night, the hum had turned into something else. A whisper. Brian woke to it. A voice. No, several voices, murmuring from the walls, soft at first, but growing louder, clearer. He sat up in bed, his breath catching in his throat. It was as though the voices were coming from the very core of the house. They were too muffled to make out the words, but the tone, it was urgent, desperate. Just the house settling, he muttered to himself, rubbing his eyes. He tried to ignore it, but it wasn't easy. The whispers didn't stop. Amanda heard them too. By the end of the week, the voices became clearer, words they couldn't ignore. The children would complain about hearing laughing and talking from inside the walls. At first, they thought it was just their imagination. But then Caleb came to Amanda one morning, wide-eyed, holding his teddy bear. "I heard them, Mom. They said we're not supposed to be here." Amanda froze. That was the breaking point. She called Brian at work that afternoon. "You need to come home," she said, her voice trembling. "The house? Something's wrong. Something's wrong with it." Brian was skeptical, of course. He thought his wife was just being paranoid. But when he walked through the front door, he knew something was off. The air felt thick. The house felt wrong, like a place you weren't meant to be. He could hear the muffled whispers, too, just beyond his hearing. But it wasn't just the voices anymore. The house felt alive, like it was watching them. That night, Amanda couldn't sleep. She kept hearing something tapping in the walls, the sound like fingers scratching the drywall. She tossed and turned, unable to ignore the feeling of being watched. She told Brian the next morning, but he just told her to relax. Then, a week later, they found the first clue. It was the sound of children's laughter, high-pitched, almost mocking, but carried with a sense of familiarity. It wasn't Olivia or Caleb's laughter. No, this was something far more sinister. It echoed through the house like a wave. It came from behind the walls, behind the foundation. Brian had had enough. He called a plumber, thinking maybe there was something wrong with the pipes. But when the plumber arrived and began inspecting the walls, he paused. His hand hovered over one of the vents. He looked at Brian with a confused expression. "There's a space behind here," he said, his voice uncertain. "Seems like it's big. I don't know why anyone would build it like this. You should get it checked out." Brian didn't think much of it at the time. A hidden crawl space, maybe something left over from the house's original design. But as the plumber continued, he found more. There were gaps in the walls, spaces too wide to be left by accident. The piping, which had been new when installed, was old now, very old, as if someone had replaced parts of it. And when Brian checked the outside of the house, he saw something even stranger. There were no ventilation ducts, no signs of typical construction, but there were signs of something else. A heavy smell, like decay. It wasn't in every room, just in the corners where the walls met the floor. Brian spent the entire next day investigating the walls, digging up old floor plans from the city's archives. But there was no mention of a hidden space, no reason for the strange arrangement of pipes. He began to feel like they were trapped in some kind of maze. There was something else here, something they weren't meant to know. That's when the first real incident happened. It was late in the evening, and Brian was working in the kitchen, trying to distract himself from the growing dread gnawing at the back of his mind. He heard a faint scraping noise from a wall. At first, it seemed like nothing, just the house creaking again. But then there was a bang, a loud crash, and Brian rushed into the living room, his heart pounding. Amanda was standing by the wall, staring at it. The drywall had cracked, splintered, and in the gap, something was moving. He could see the outline of a figure behind the wall. "Brian, do you see that?" Amanda whispered, her voice trembling. Before he could answer, the figure vanished, and the laughter echoed again, louder, clearer. This time, Brian didn't ignore it. They both rushed outside, but before they could leave, the front door slammed shut with a force that made the house tremble. The windows were locked, every exit sealed. They were trapped. Frantic, Brian grabbed his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. "There's something in our house, something behind the walls." Brian screamed into the phone. The operator paused. "Sir, please calm down." But she was cut off. The phone line crackled, and then Brian heard a sound that made his blood freeze. A voice, soft like a whisper, but it was coming from the 911 dispatcher. Help us." The voice was faint, barely audible, but it wasn't just the operator. It was something else, something much older. "Get out of the house," the operator finally shouted. "Leave, now." But it was too late. The house wasn't just haunted. It was something far worse. As the police arrived hours later, the house had already given up its secrets. It wasn't just the walls. It wasn't just the strange noises. Someone had been living there, and they weren't alone. The police arrived, but they were too late. The Marks family was shaken, terrified, and stranded in their own home. The front door had been locked from the inside, the windows sealed, and the whole house felt like it was slowly closing in on them. They couldn't even step outside. There was something holding them in place, something far more insidious than they had imagined. When the officers arrived, they found Brian and Amanda standing at the entrance, eyes wide, terror evident on their faces. Olivia and Caleb huddled behind them, shaking. We heard it," Amanda whispered to police, her voice barely audible. "It's inside the walls. Something's in there, and it's been there for years." The officer who responded was Detective Marhunter, a seasoned investigator who had seen his share of strange cases, but nothing like this. He was skeptical, thinking that it was just a case of paranoia or maybe an overactive imagination, but the Marks family was so frightened that it was hard to ignore. He decided to do a quick sweep of the house, hoping to find something, anything, to explain the terror they were feeling. But what he found wasn't what he expected. The house was eerily quiet when the officers first entered. There was no hum or whispering, no eerie laughter. It felt almost peaceful, too peaceful. But as Hunter moved deeper into the house, He began to notice things that didn't quite add up. The air was thick with an oppressive humidity, and the strange smell, decay, rot, seemed to come from the walls themselves. The further they went, the more the house felt like it was pressing in on them. The basement was the first place they searched. Hunter stood in the doorway, staring down at the stairs leading into the darkened pit below. The dim glow of the flashlights cast long shadows on the walls. "Check the basement," he said to the officers. "Maybe there's something down there." They descended carefully, shining their lights over every inch of space. They found nothing out of the ordinary, just old, forgotten furniture, boxes filled with broken appliances, and the occasional rodent nest. But as they were about to leave, one of the officers noticed something odd. A section of the wall appeared to have been recently disturbed. "We didn't see this when we first came in," the officer muttered, pointing to a patch of drywall that seemed to have been hastily repaired. Hunter moved closer. He ran his fingers over the surface of the patch. It felt wrong. It wasn't the same as the rest of the house. The texture was different, smoother, almost like someone had tried to hide something. "Get the tools," Hunter ordered. They pried open the wall carefully, revealing what lay behind it, a hidden crawl space. But it wasn't just any crawl space. Inside, they found a makeshift living area, blankets, cans of food, dirty clothes. It looked like someone had been living there. The most disturbing part, however, was a collection of objects in the corner. There were children's toys, broken, forgotten, some stained, and a dozen old photographs, their edges curling with age. The pictures were all of children, faces frozen in time. Some were smiling, others stared at the camera with wide, vacant eyes. Whoever was living here, they weren't alone, Hunter said, his voice low. He motioned to his team to continue searching the crawl space. They found more evidence, old newspapers, books, and what looked like a journal. They opened the journal, and what they found inside made Hunter's stomach churn. The entries were dated back years, decades in fact, and the writings were disturbing. Descriptions of children being taken, hidden away, and then eventually disappearing. Hunter's heart raced as he flipped through the pages. The last entry was dated only a few days before the Marks family had moved in. "The whispers in the walls have stopped," it read. "I've heard their laughter again. It's time for the game to begin." It was then that Hunter realized just how deep this case went. The house wasn't just a place of lingering spirits. It was a place where something far darker was at play. As the officers continued their search, they found more disturbing clues. They discovered a hole behind the walls leading to another hidden room, this one far older, more decrepit, and it was there in the corner of this room that they found the final piece of the puzzle, a body. It wasn't just any body, though. It was a child, or what remained of one. The remains were skeletal, yet the clothes were too recent to be old. It was as though the child had been left there. But for how long? Hunter stepped back, staring at the grim scene. He realized that the house had been a prison for countless children over the years, each one disappearing, their presence erased as quickly as they came. "They didn't just live here," Hunter muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were kept here, trapped." The horror of the situation began to settle in. The laughter they had heard? That wasn't the sound of ghosts. It was the sound of lost children, forever trapped between the living and the dead. The police worked through the night, searching every inch of the house, but there were no more answers, only more questions. The marks of previous tenants were everywhere, but nothing could explain what had been going on inside the walls. As morning light began to creep through the grimy windows, Hunter stood in the living room with his team, his mind racing. He needed to get the Marks family out of the house. But what about the other families who had lived here? Who else had heard the whispers, the laughter, the strange voices? Had anyone else been affected by the unseen presence? The more Hunter thought about it, the more he realized that the house had a far darker history than anyone could imagine. The next step was to get to the bottom of it all. Hunter called in a forensic team and a child psychologist, someone who could help understand the strange dynamics of the case. Together, They would go through the journal entries found in the crawl space, the photographs, and the eerie notes about children who vanished only to return and vanish again. As Hunter sat in his car, his phone buzzing with updates, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers weren't going to be simple. The house itself had become a labyrinth of horrors, its walls hiding far too many secrets. He glanced at the Marks family's case file, specifically the record of their purchase of the house. What he found sent a chill through his bones. The family who had lived there before the Marks had only stayed a few months before moving out under strange circumstances. No one knew why, and their names were buried in the file with nothing more than a few vague references. The property had been foreclosed on shortly after, and no one had bothered to ask questions. But one detail stood out. A single name was written in the margin of the file: Lena Howard. Hunter couldn't help but think that the name sounded familiar. He decided to investigate further. Lena Howard, it turned out, had been a well-known local figure in the late 90s. She had been a mother twice over, who, according to the records, had disappeared along with her 2 children. The case was never solved. The house had been the last place she'd lived, but all traces of her and her children had vanished without a trace. It wasn't until later, after his team had conducted a search in the nearby area, that Hunter learned the most disturbing truth. Lena Howard had been seen walking near the house just days before the Marks family moved in. The implications were clear. The house, once a simple foreclosed property, now seemed like a place where nightmares took form. Was Lena Howard's disappearance linked to the tragedies in the house? Had she and her children been swallowed by the house's endless maze of hidden rooms and dark corners? And what had she known about the house that had made her family vanish? Hunter needed to get to the bottom of this. He contacted the local historical society, hoping that there was some record, some scrap of evidence that could shed light on the house's dark past. The first thing he discovered was a chilling truth. The house was not built in the 1920s as the local records claimed. It was much older, at least a century old, and had been a part of Detroit's industrial boom. It had changed hands many times, but one thing remained constant. People who lived there vanished. But there was something even more disturbing. A former owner, a man by the name of Joseph Devereux, had been rumored to have been involved in several disappearances during the early 1900s. His name had been wiped from the official records, but locals whispered that he had been a part of something far darker. Hunter's investigation led him to Devereux's mansion, a sprawling estate that had been abandoned for years. When he stepped inside, he immediately felt a strange sense of familiarity, like the walls themselves were watching him. As he dug through the records, he came across one of the most disturbing details yet. Devereux had been obsessed with the idea of trapping souls. He had built hidden rooms inside his house, rooms that were intentionally designed to disorient and confuse the mind. It was as if he had been preparing the house to become something more than just a building. What if, in some twisted way, Devereux's obsession with the paranormal had somehow affected the house long after he was gone? What if it had become a living nightmare, a trap for souls to wander forever? The night after Hunter uncovered this information, he returned to the Marks home, determined to confront whatever evil had been buried within the walls. He took Olivia and Caleb with him, hoping they could offer some insight, though he knew it might only make things worse. As they entered the house, the air felt colder. The house felt alive, its walls echoing with something unspoken. Olivia, always the brave one, started to walk toward the basement, but before she could take another step, Caleb froze. "Mom, listen," he whispered. The voices, they're here again. The low, whispering laughter began to fill the air. The walls seemed to breathe with every sound. Caleb's voice faltered. "Someone's watching us." Hunter felt his blood run cold. It was happening again. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if someone or something was trying to break through the walls, to make itself known. And then it stopped. There was silence. No laughter, no whispers, just pure, suffocating silence. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Hunter's heart raced. He glanced over at Olivia, whose eyes were wide with fear. Her hand shook as she reached out, grabbing Hunter's arm. "Look," she whispered, her voice trembling. In the corner of the room, standing in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall, thin, and shrouded in darkness. The figure seemed to flicker, its presence impossible to fully focus on, but its eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. The figure stepped forward, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Olivia gasped as the figure whispered something, though the words were indecipherable. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness of the walls, leaving nothing but the sound of child's laughter echoing through the house. The morgue was always a quiet place, cold, sterile, and devoid of life. Its halls echoed with silence, interrupted only by the distant hum of refrigeration units and the occasional creak of old pipes. For the residents of the small Ohio town, it was a place to mourn, to remember, and to forget. But for one man, it was more than just a job. It was a sanctuary, a dark haven where his true self could be revealed. Darrell Briggs was known to everyone in town as the quiet, efficient morgue assistant. With a tall, gaunt frame and a perpetually neutral expression, he blended into the background of life in the county morgue. He had been working there for over a decade, handling the deceased with reverence and professionalism. To the public, he was the picture of calm and competence, someone you could trust in the most uncomfortable of situations. No one knew that beneath his calm demeanor, Darrell had a secret life, a life that was anything but professional. He had always been fascinated by death, by the way life slipped away from the body. But it wasn't just a scientific curiosity that kept him in his line of work. It was the rituals, the personal connection he formed with the deceased. Darrell had an obsession, a darkness that twisted his mind over the years, turning his job into a ritualistic obsession. It started small, a few strange gestures, slightly too much attention to the details of the bodies he worked with, the look in his eyes when he performed his duties. There was something unsettling about it, though no one could pinpoint why. But as time went on, his fascination grew. He began performing strange rites in the quiet, private hours of the morgue, when the doors were locked and the town was asleep. He would chant low, eerie words to the corpses, whispering to them as though they could hear him. He would place small trinkets around them, symbols only he understood, and he began to take things that shouldn't be taken, from the bodies he worked with. Darrell didn't just see the dead as lifeless shells. To him, they were vessels, conduits through which he could reach something beyond. He believed that by performing these rituals, he could control death, perhaps even bring some of it back. The morgue itself became his personal sanctuary. He converted an underground room, hidden beneath the main floor, into his own private altar. It was a place where he could practice his dark rituals in secrecy. He kept the room locked, but the faint smell of incense and something heavier, more metallic, leaked into the air when you passed by. No one questioned it. The staff had always known Darrell was a little odd, but no one knew just how far his obsession had gone. Things took a dark turn one chilly autumn night. A young intern named Sarah Jones had just started working at the morgue. Bright, eager, and far too curious for her own good, she quickly became suspicious of Darrell's odd behavior. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the longer she worked with him, the more she noticed strange things. Late-night shifts with Darrell felt different, darker. The way he would linger over certain bodies, touching them in a way that was too intimate. The way he spoke to them, as if they could answer back. And the way he would sometimes look at her, cold, calculating, like he was trying to read her mind. It wasn't long before Sarah started digging into Darrell's past. She discovered that he had never really fit in. He'd been an outcast since childhood, obsessed with the macabre. He had no family, no friends, just the cold, lifeless bodies that seemed to call out to him. His childhood was a string of strange incidents, disturbing behavior, and a series of failed psychological evaluations. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with him, something far worse than she could ever have imagined. One night, after Darrell had left for the evening, Sarah stayed behind, unable to ignore her growing unease. She had a feeling something was happening in the morgue that no one could explain. She had noticed a few of the doors of back rooms were always locked, and the strange odor seemed to grow stronger each time she walked past. Her instincts told her that something needed to be done. She couldn't let this go on. She set out to investigate the underground room, the one Darryl always kept sealed. She had seen the faint glow of candlelight coming from beneath the door and heard muffled sounds that made her skin crawl. When she finally found a key hidden in Darryl's office, she didn't hesitate. She crept down the stairs, holding her breath as she approached the door. The air down there was thick, heavy with the scent of something putrid. She could hear the faint murmur of Darryl's voice, though she couldn't make out the words. The door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit room. Inside, the walls were covered with strange symbols, drawn hastily in dark red ink. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars containing various unidentifiable objects, bones, hair, and other items that made Sarah's stomach churn. In the center of the room, an altar stood, covered in candles and other ritualistic tools. But it was the body that truly horrified her. On the table in the middle of the room lay the corpse of a man. His body was surrounded by strange symbols, his chest cracked open as if something had been removed, something vital. Darryl was standing over the body, murmuring to it, his hands gliding over its skin as though he was communicating with it. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. What was he doing? What had he done to the body? Before she could turn to leave, Darryl's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You shouldn't have come down here, Sarah," he said, his voice low and cold. Sarah froze, the blood draining from her face, as she realized Darryl had known. She was there all along. The dim light from the candles flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a deafening drum in her ears. She spun around to face him, but her legs felt as though they were made of stone, rooted to the ground. Darryl stood there, his expression calm, eerily serene. His pale face seemed almost too still, his eyes too focused, as though he was waiting for something for her. What is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. She couldn't mask the fear that crept into her words. She had seen enough to know that what was going on here was beyond any explanation she could comprehend. Darryl didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate, almost slow, like a predator stalking its prey. The cold air in the room seemed to tighten around her, making it harder to breathe. "It's a place of transition," he finally replied, his voice soft but chilling. "A place where the dead are not quite dead, where they can still hear, still understand." Sarah felt her stomach churn. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the body on the table. The corpse was grotesque, unnaturally altered, but what sent a shiver down her spine was a subtle movement she thought she saw in its chest. Barely noticeable, but enough to make her doubt her own sanity. "W, what did you do to him?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Darryl's lips curled into a slow smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I took him home," he said, almost as if he was explaining something simple, like offering a glass of water. "I'm helping them find peace, Sarah. I'm giving them a way to cross over, to return." "Return," Sarah repeated, confused and horrified. "What do you mean by return? These people, they're dead. You can't just bring them back." "Oh, but I can," Darryl said with a soft chuckle. "I've learned the way. The rituals, the incantations, the rules are simple once you understand them." He stepped even closer, and for a moment, Sarah could see something dark flash in his eyes, something far beyond human understanding. "I bring them back for a time. I help them remember," he continued. "And when they're ready, when they understand their purpose, they go back. Home." Sarah felt her knees buckle beneath her. She had to get out of there. This wasn't just a sick obsession. This was something much worse. She turned, intended to make a run for the door, but as she moved, Darryl's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. His grip was like iron. "You can't leave, Sarah," he said, his voice suddenly low. "Dangerous." "Not yet." Her breath hitched in her throat as panic surged through her. She yanked at her arm, but his hold didn't loosen. His fingers seemed to dig into her skin, cold and unyielding. She tried to scream, but the words caught in her throat. The room seemed to warp around her, the walls closing in, the air thickening with the smell of death and incense. Sarah's eyes darted to the body on the table, and in that moment, she saw it, the subtle, unmistakable twitch of the corpse's fingers. It wasn't dead. "Let go of me." Sarah managed to choke out, struggling in his grip. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Her vision began to blur as her heart raced. Daryl's smile deepened, his eyes never leaving her face. "You'll understand, Sarah. You'll see. They all come home in the end." He pulled her closer, forcing her to kneel next to the altar. His hands were uncomfortably gentle as he guided her, and for a moment, Sarah could swear she heard soft, disembodied whispers echoing through the room, as though the walls themselves were alive. The shadows seemed to twist, forming shapes that loomed over them both, watching in eerie silence. With trembling hands, Daryl reached into a drawer near the altar and pulled out a small vial. Inside was a dark liquid, thick and black like oil or tar. Sarah recoiled, but Daryl only laughed softly. "It's a gift," he whispered, uncorking the vial and holding it before her. "For you, for when you're ready to take your place here." "No," Sarah gasped, pulling away. "I don't want this. I don't want any part of it." "You already do," Daryl said, his voice cold as stone. "You can't leave once you've seen what's behind the veil." He forced the vial closer to her lips. She could smell the foul stench of the liquid, could almost taste it on the back of her throat. Her body shook with fear as she struggled to fight him off, but it was no use. His grip was too strong. As the vial drew closer, Sarah's eyes darted to the body on the table once more. The man's eyes, no longer lifeless, were open, staring directly at her. His pupils were clouded, yet his gaze was filled with something, understanding, recognition. The whispers in the room grew louder, and Sarah's mind screamed for her to break free. But just as she prepared to make a final attempt to escape, Daryl's voice stopped her in her tracks. "You're already one of them now, Sarah," he murmured. "The dead will never truly leave, not when they found their home." Sarah's eyes were wide, her chest heaving with panic. She could feel her heart beating so fast that it was as if it might burst from her chest. The room was growing smaller, the shadows creeping in, twisting and contorting, and the whispers, the voices, were getting louder, surrounding her. The very walls of the morgue seemed to close in, as if closing off any possible escape. Daryl's hand, cold as death itself, gripped her wrist tighter, pulling her closer to the table where the corpse lay, the man's eyes never leaving hers. They were filled with something beyond death, something alive, and yet not. It was as if he was waiting for something, as if he was calling to her. "Let go of me, Daryl." Sarah screamed, finally breaking free of his hold with all the strength she could muster. She scrambled back, but she was already too close to the altar. The whispers seemed to come from the walls, the floors, the very air around her, urging her to stay, to accept the fate that Daryl had prepared for her. But in her panic, Sarah's eyes locked on something that stopped her dead in her tracks. On the far side of the room, behind Daryl, was a large mirror. She had not noticed it before, hidden in the shadows. The mirror was cracked, but she could see her own reflection in it, flickering, distorted, as though something beyond was looking back at her. And then she saw it. In the reflection, standing just behind her, was the very man who lay on the slab in front of her. His figure was blurry but unmistakable. His pale face, eyes wide open, staring at her. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was seeing. It wasn't just his reflection. He was there in the room, standing right behind her, his body unnaturally rigid, his arms hanging limply by his sides. He wasn't alive, but he wasn't dead either. He was something in between, just like Daryl had said. And the worst part? He was smiling. She turned quickly, but when she looked back at the mirror, he was gone, just a reflection of the empty room. Her heart was in her throat now, her mind spinning as she fought to understand what was happening. "Daryl," she gasped, her voice weak. "What are you doing? What is this? Why are you doing this to them?" Darryl stood motionless, his expression unreadable. "I'm giving them what they deserve," he said quietly, almost tenderly, as though explaining a simple concept to a child. "They were denied peace, Sarah. They were forgotten, so I brought them home. I've helped them remember." "You're insane!" she shouted, backing away from the altar. She was close to the door now, the metal handle within her grasp. But she couldn't tear her eyes away from Darryl or the mirror or the body on the table. "No," he said softly, almost with pity in his voice. "You don't understand. They were never truly gone. You think they're dead, but they're still here. They've always been here, waiting to return." With that, Darryl stepped back, his cold gaze never leaving hers. Then, without warning, the corpse on the table stirred. It wasn't much, just the faintest twitch, but it was enough. The body seemed to convulse, as though something inside it was coming back to life. Sarah's blood ran cold. "No!" she whispered, taking another step back, her legs trembling beneath her. "Please, no!" The body jerked again, its head snapping to the side, and its eyes, those glassy, lifeless eyes, locked onto Sarah. "Help me!" the corpse mouthed, its lips barely moving. "Help me?" The word sent a chill through Sarah's spine, a dread so deep she thought she might collapse right there. She could hear the faint sound of breathing, slow, shallow, but unmistakable, coming from the corpse. She felt the air grow heavier around her as the voice grew louder, growing into a series of whispers, then wails of agony. They were trapped here, she realized. She was not alone in this room. These corpses, these souls that Darryl had brought home, they were not at peace. They were angry, bitter, and filled with the agony of their unfinished lives. The voices in the room became deafening, louder than ever, filling her head with panic. Sarah looked at Darryl, her voice trembling. You've turned them into something worse. You've cursed them." Darryl's face tightened. "No, I've set them free. They will return to their loved ones. They will never be forgotten." But Sarah could no longer listen to him. She had seen enough. With a scream of terror, she bolted toward the door. Her heart was racing as she turned the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She yanked at it desperately, pulling harder as the room seemed to close in on her, the whispers growing louder until they were more like a chorus of screams. The door finally gave way, and she ran down the hall, her feet pounding against the cold tile floor. She could hear footsteps behind her, but she didn't dare look back. The moor was alive with sounds, the cries of the dead, the whispers of those who had returned home. As she burst through the exit and into the night air, the cold hit her like a slap in the face. But it wasn't enough to cool the fire in her chest. The echoes of the dead followed her, and she could hear them calling her name, even as she sprinted away from a morgue. She ran, faster than she had ever run in her life. But deep down, she knew it was useless. The dead had already found her, and there was no escaping them. They had come home. Story 5. The fire had started in the early hours of the morning, when the sleepy town of Ashford was still blanketed in darkness. Thick smoke poured from the old church on Main Street, rising into the night sky like a signal for something terrible that had long been buried. It was a kind of fire that looked more like an omen than an accident, a fire that was bound to uncover something much darker than anyone could have anticipated. As the firefighters arrived, they immediately began working to contain the blaze. The church had been closed for years, abandoned since the mysterious disappearance of its pastor decades ago. It had stood empty, its windows boarded up, its doors locked tight. No one had dared step inside for as long as anyone could remember. Some of the townsfolk swore the place was cursed, haunted by whispers of what had happened in its final days. But what the firefighters discovered as they fought to put out the flames was far worse than anyone could have imagined. As the fire raged inside, one of the firefighters, a young man named Dan Miller, had been assigned to search the basement. The thick smoke and heat were overwhelming, but he had a duty to perform. His flashlight cut through the darkness as he descended into the cellar. the beams illuminating the damp walls and the remnants of old wooden pews scattered throughout. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood, and something else, something foul. It wasn't until he reached the farthest corner of the basement that he found it. Hidden beneath a pile of old rotting furniture was a trapdoor. It wasn't part of the original structure. Someone had covered it up, sealing it away. Dan's curiosity took over, and he carefully pried it open, revealing a darkened space beneath. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he descended into the hidden depths of the church. The basement was colder here and much darker. The air seemed to thicken the further he went, carried with it the faint scent of something unsettling. His flashlight swept across the walls and floor, revealing shelves filled with old, dusty boxes and books, most of them unreadable from years of neglect. But as his light landed on a table against the far wall, something caught his attention. Old VHS tapes. Dozens of them. Each one was labeled with a date and a first name. Some dates were recent, others decades old. The names on the tapes were mostly unfamiliar, though a few were vaguely recognizable from town. But what caught Dan's attention was a sense of dread that washed over him as he gazed at them. There was something unsettling about the neatness with which the tapes had been arranged, as if someone had been storing them here for years, waiting for the day when they would be found. Without hesitation, he grabbed one of the tapes, labeled Jacob 1985, and brought it to the church's small office upstairs. His hands trembled as he inserted it into the VHS player. The static crackled on the screen before it cleared, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The footage showed a man sitting in front of the camera, his face half hidden in shadow. He was speaking, but the voice was distorted, altered, as if the recording had been tampered with. "I've sinned," the man on the screen said, his voice low and broken. I've done terrible things, and now I must confess." Dan's pulse quickened. He could feel the unease settle deep in his stomach. The man on the screen, who he later learned was named Jacob, was speaking with a sense of desperation, as though he was confessing to something that weighed on him deeply. And as the camera zoomed in on his face, Dan saw something chilling in his eyes. Fear. The footage continued, but Dan could barely keep his eyes on the screen. He could feel the walls closing in, suffocating him with the weight of confession, the heaviness of the air. His mind raced, trying to piece together what he had just seen, what this strange confession meant. But there was no time for questions. Not yet. The tape flickered again, and the picture cut out. Before Dan could react, the door to the office opened, and Sheriff Avery Hayes entered. He was an older man, his face creased with age, but his eyes were sharp and focused. He had been a sheriff of Ashford for as long as anyone could remember, and he had seen his fair share of strange things in his time. But this was different. "I heard about the tapes," Sheriff Hayes said, his voice gruff but steady. "Let me see it." Dan handed him the tape, his hand still shaking. Sheriff Hayes studied the footage, his brow furrowed in thought. It wasn't until the man on the screen spoke again, his face twisted in torment, that Hayes froze. "Jacob," he whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "That's my brother." Dan turned to him, eyes wide in disbelief. "Your brother?" Sheriff Hayes nodded slowly, his face paling as he watched the footage. "He disappeared in 1985. No one ever found him. The whole town thought he was dead. Now, after all these years, I don't know what to think." Dan's mind was racing. What did this mean? Why would Sheriff Hayes' brother be on a tape like this? Why had it been hidden in a basement, stored away like some twisted secret? "I need to see the rest of these tapes," Hayes muttered, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and dread. "I need to know what's going on here." As he began to search through the stack of tapes, something clicked in Dan's mind. This wasn't just some strange, isolated incident. Something far darker had been happening in Ashford. A hidden ritual, a cult that had been operating in the shadows for decades. And now, it seemed, it was all coming to light. But as the tapes continued to roll, it became clear that the true horror had just begun. The confessions on the tapes weren't just admissions of sin. They were far more sinister. And someone had been watching, waiting, was determined to make sure that these secrets stayed buried forever. The next day, Sheriff Hayes and Dan returned to the church, determined to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden beneath the rubble. The fire had been mostly contained, but the basement still smoldered, and the oppressive smell of smoke clung to the air. They had a stack of tapes now, each labeled with a name and a date, just like the first one. The question was, who had recorded them and why? "I've been a sheriff in this town for over 30 years, Hayes muttered as they made their way through the wreckage. "I've seen a lot of things, but this is something different." The basement was eerily quiet now, the crackling of flames replaced by the faint echo of footsteps on the floor. The charred remains of the church's old pews lay scattered about, but beneath the debris, they could still see the remains of the trapdoor Dan had opened the previous night. It had been barely touched by the flames, as if the fire had intentionally spared it. It was almost as though someone or something had wanted it to stay hidden. "I don't like this, Sheriff," Dan said, his voice low and strained. "There's something about all this that feels wrong." Hayes didn't reply immediately. Instead, he bent down and began to sift the remains of the trapdoor, lifting the charred planks and revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside, there was a leather-bound journal. "Found something," Hayes muttered. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, brushing away the soot to reveal a faded cover. The journal had clearly been here for decades, but it was in surprisingly good condition. Without a word, he opened the first page. The handwriting was spidery and uneven, as if written by someone in distress. As Hayes read the first entry, his face grew pale. "I can't keep doing this. I've been told to keep recording. I don't know why they're doing it, but I'm terrified. I'm in too deep. Please, someone help me before it's too late." That's Jacob's handwriting," Hayes whispered, his voice breaking. Dan's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea who Jacob was, only that the tape he watched earlier had been his confession. But this journal, this was something new, something even darker. Hayes continued reading aloud, his voice thick with emotion as he read through the journal's fragmented entries. "The tapes are for the ritual. They have to confess. But it's not about repentance. It's about binding them. The ritual must continue, and the ones who confess will be the ones who vanish." The hairs on the back of Dan's neck stood up. A ritual? Confessions? Vanishing? "What is this?" Dan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Hayes slammed the journal shut, his face contorted in a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is something I've been trying to forget. Something I thought I had buried with my brother." Dan stepped back, unsure what to say. What does it all mean? What's this ritual? And where are the people on the tapes? Sheriff Hayes wiped his face, his eyes filled with a deep, painful regret. It was a cult, a twisted group of people who used the church for their dark rituals. They believed that by recording confessions, they could bind the souls of the people involved with the church, turn them into something other than human. Dan stared at him, stunned. "Are you telling me this was happening right under everyone's noses?" Hayes nodded grimly. "Yes, people would come to confess, thinking they were absolving their sins. But in truth, they were being pulled deeper into the web of this cult. And when they disappeared, when they were sacrificed, that was the end of it." Dan's mind reeled. This was worse than he could have imagined. The tapes, the confessions, the vanished people, all of it tied to something far darker than a simple cult. It was a kind of perverse immortality they sought through the souls of the innocent. "I don't understand," Dan said, his voice cracking. "What's the connection to the tapes?" "They were the evidence," Hayes explained. Each tape was a confession. Each confession was a step closer to sealing their fate. "Jacob, my brother, he was one of them. He didn't just disappear. He was taken by them. And now I'm afraid he might be something else, something unrecognizable." Dan felt a chill wash over him. "So, all of this, these people on the tapes, they're gone? Like your brother?" Hayes shook his head, looking at Dan with a solemn gaze. "I thought so, but after what we found here, I'm not so sure anymore." They both stood in silence, the weight of Hayes' words hanging heavy in the air. The truth was darker than either of them had expected. It was only just beginning to reveal itself. As Hayes rifled through the remaining tapes, he paused on one. The label read, Mark, 1993. "This one is different," he said, holding it up. "This is a tape from a man who vanished just a few months before my brother. His name was Mark. He was the last person to disappear before I shut down the church operation for good. I thought we buried it, but it seems the cult was never truly gone." Dan could feel the blood drain from his face. "What do you mean, shut down the operation?" "I had to stop it. I had to make the town believe the church was abandoned and that the cult was finished. I thought that would keep them safe. I didn't know it would lead us here. To this." Dan felt a surge of unease wash over him. There was no turning back now. The mysteries of the tapes had unraveled a truth more horrifying than he could have imagined. "Let's watch this one," Dan said, his voice shaky yet determined. He knew they couldn't stop until they knew the full truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The tape clicked as Hayes inserted it into the player, and the screen flickered to life once again. What they saw next would haunt them forever. The room was dimly lit by the flickering glow of the old TV. Hayes and Dan sat in silence as the tape started to roll. The screen displayed static for a moment before clearing, revealing a grainy image of a man sitting in a wooden chair, his hands bound to the arms. He looked tired, drawn with dark circles under his eyes, but it was his expression that sent a shiver down their spines. He was terrified. The man's name was Mark. Dan could tell because the label on the tape had clearly indicated it. But the face that stared back at them wasn't just any man. It was the face of someone who had been through unimaginable horrors. The footage was shaky, as if it had been recorded in a hurry, and the camera zoomed in on Mark's face. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he took deep, measured breaths. "This is it," Mark said in a hoarse whisper, his voice barely audible. "I didn't want to do this, but I have no choice. I have to confess." Dan exchanged a look with Hayes, whose expression had turned even more somber. "We can stop this, Mark. We don't have to go through with it," a voice said from off-camera, a voice that was eerily calm. It belonged to a man, probably the same person who had orchestrated the confessions. It was too hard to make out his face, but there was something disturbingly familiar about his tone. Mark shook his head, looking desperate. "No, you don't understand. If I don't do this, they'll take me. They'll take my soul." Hayes grimaced. This wasn't just some cult. This was a manipulation of the very essence of who they were. It was about something far darker than anyone could imagine. Dan didn't speak, too focused on the screen. Mark's body language was erratic, his breath quick and shallow. It was clear he was under duress. This wasn't a confession born of guilt, but of sheer terror. The camera zoomed in on the man's eyes, bloodshot and wide, as he whispered something almost inaudible. "I saw them. They took her, and then they took me. It's happening again. If you're watching this, don't trust anyone." The tape flickered, and then the image of Mark cut off. The screen went black for a few moments, and then it returned, but now the footage was different. The man, Mark, was no longer in the chair. In fact, the chair was empty. The only thing left was a faint echo of his last words lingering in the air. "Don't trust anyone." "What the hell?" Dan muttered, leaning forward. He glanced at Hayes, whose face had gone pale. His expression was a mix of shock and horror, as if he was watching something he had feared would happen, but hoped would never be confirmed. Hayes was frozen. "That's it. That's the last tape of Mark," he said, his voice shaking. He vanished right after that. We thought he ran. We thought he was scared, just like the others. But I never thought they'd take him." Dan stared at the screen in disbelief. "They took him? Took him how?" Hayes shook his head, unable to speak at first. "That's what I couldn't figure out all those years ago. We believed the church had been abandoned by the time Mark disappeared. But the truth is, it never truly was. The The people involved in these rituals, they had the power to do things that defy reason. They didn't just kill their victims. They took them. Dan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. You mean they're still out there? Still doing this? Hayes stood up, pacing the room, his eyes frantic. I don't know. I thought I'd shut them down. I thought I destroyed all the evidence. But now I'm seeing for myself. They're still out there, lurking in the shadows. These tapes are proof. Every confession, every soul they took, they just vanish. They disappear into thin air. Dan's mind raced. The footage on the tapes, the confessions, the sinister ritual, they weren't just chilling pieces of the past. They were part of something that was still ongoing. The cult, or whatever it was still out there, continuing its work. What do we do now? Dan asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Hayes didn't respond immediately. He was still staring at the blank screen, his hands clenched tightly by his sides. He finally turned to face Dan, his eyes dark and filled with regret. I don't know, he said, his voice heavy. But we have to find out who's behind this, who's been keeping these tapes hidden all these years. And we have to stop them before they take anyone else. The weight of Hayes's words hung in the air, pressing down on Dan's chest. He knew they couldn't turn back now. They had uncovered something far darker than they could have ever imagined, and it was up to them to see it through to the end. Do you still have that list? Dan asked, suddenly remembering the names from the tapes. Hayes nodded. I do, but it's not going to be easy. Some of the people on that list are long gone. Some may still be living, but we have to start somewhere. And we start by tracking down every name on that list. Dan nodded, determined. Let's get to work. Together. They made their way out of the church, the fading daylight casting long shadows across the decaying structure. But as they stepped into the cool night air, Dan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The journey had just begun, and so the old tapes went silent. The church stood hollow again, and the confessions were never meant to be heard. But what if I told you there's still names left on those tapes? Names of people who never made a home. Names of people like you, listening alone in the dark, wondering if the voice in the basement was ever really gone. Sleep tight if you still can. You've been listening to Mr. DarXnights. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the night isn't over, and the next story might already be unfolding right outside your window. Good night.